So here we have question 45, and this is from the SAT number 9. This is April 2017. And this is a paired question, so we have question 45 and 46. So the way to solve this is to start by reading the question for 45, and then going to the answer choices for 46, and we're going to be looking for the answer choice that could best answer the question. So the question for 45 says, it can reasonably be inferred from the passage that Martone's research interest in lignin should be considered something. So we should focus on this part here, Martone's research interest, and try to find a text that will tell us about this interest. And we'll use a couple things to help us find our text more quickly. So the first thing is to note that question 45 comes relatively early in the series of questions for this passage. So because it's an earlier question, I expect it's probably going to refer to an earlier part of the text, which would make answer choices A, B, and C more likely because they reference earlier parts of the text. The other thing that I'm going to think is here we're talking about Martone's research interest in lignin. Maybe we're talking about sort of his first interest, right? Because we know that he makes a study, he makes a finding about lignin, but maybe his research interest, we're going to be talking about sort of this initial research that he has. The third thing that we'll do is we're going to be looking at question 48, which references lines 32. And using the question order rule, we could say that our text is more than likely to come before 32, again making A, B, C more likely. So let's look through the answer choices for 46, and we're going to be looking for any of them that talk about Martone's research interest in lignin. So let's start with questions 7 through 9. So 7 through 9 says here, lignin production for those tasks was considered a key adaptive advantage of vascular plants which descend from green algae. So this is not a good answer choice because it doesn't have anything to do with Martone. Martone is actually not mentioned until here. And so because he's not mentioned until later, it's usually unlikely that any text before his first mention is going to have anything to do with him. And in general, it's really just about lignin production and basically what the general scientific community thought about lignin production prior to Martone's research. So not a good answer choice. Let's get rid of A. B says lines 13 through 16, which is here. The findings suggest that a biological building block fundamental to the success of land plants has roots that stretch back far deeper and maybe wider through evolutionary time than was known. So again, this really doesn't have anything much to do with Martone. All this is saying is that the finding that he made, it's explaining the significance of that finding. Basically saying that it sort of changes what we think about the evolutionary timeline of the development of lignin because we're finding its production in this algae. And again, it comes before the first mention of Martone, so that makes it more unlikely that that will be our text for this question here. So let's get rid of B. Then we have answer choice C, which references lines 23 through 26. That is right here. The biomechanist simply wanted to better understand the toughness of this algae, which dwells in the harsh habitat of intertidal zones along rocky shores. So here, again, one thing that we should know, the habit that we should have is always to check our references. So here we're talking about the biomechanist. Who is that mentioned? Pretty easy to find because it's right here. That's Martone. So this is about Martone, and this is about his research interest in lignin. Right? It says here that he didn't set out to locate lignin in algae, he just wanted to find or better understand the toughness of this kind of algae. So even though this little first part here that talks about lignin is outside of the parameters of the text, anytime that we have a reference or a pronoun or something that's referenced within the text, like for example biomechanist here, it sort of gives us permission to step more outside of the text. Even if we don't have that situation, in general, it's okay to look just at the perimeter or the periphery of the actual text that's cited to get a little more context. Although when it comes down to making really detailed decisions, you do want to focus your attention more specifically on the sentence that's referenced. So this is a pretty good answer choice, I would say, because it does talk about Martone and it does talk about his research interest into lignin. So we'll choose answer choice C. We won't choose it yet, but we will keep it for now. So then we have answer choice D, which references lines 59 through 61. My first thought when I look at this is that it's really far away from the rest of the text here. Not only that, but it also sort of violates our question order rule, which is not so much a rule, it just basically gives us a higher probability So it could still be answer choice D, even though it comes after line 32 here, but it makes it less likely. Also, I find that usually this happens fairly often with these types of paired questions, where you'll have a bunch of lines that are clustered together, like A, B, C, and then you have another answer choice that's sort of separated from the pack. It's a little farther out, and it tends to be wrong. But let's look at it anyway to see if it could be our text. So here we have 59 through 61, which says the puzzling thing is that it's also present in calcified portions of the algae. That would be lignin, and we don't know what it's doing there, Martone says. So this is about Martone, it is about lignin in general, but it doesn't really talk about his research interests in the same way that answer choice C does. It doesn't talk about his research interest, and it's also so much farther away from the other answer choices. Instead, what it does is it sort of presents an extra question about lignin, but this is almost like after his finding, not so much the thing that led towards his finding. So for that reason, I'm going to get rid of answer choice D, which means that we will select answer choice C for question 46. So one more time, the question here is basically asking what do we know about his research interests about lignin, and now we're going to use these lines here to answer that. So 23, 26, one more time, basically says that initially he didn't set out to locate lignin in algae. All he wanted to do was understand the toughness of it. So what this tells us is basically that when he first started doing his research, he wasn't trying to find lignin. He didn't really have any interest in it. He was actually looking at something entirely different and then stumbled upon this finding. So there's a little bit of accident and serendipity in his discovery of it. So we want an answer choice that will reference that. So A says that his research interest was unusually insightful. Already at this point, I'm skeptical of this answer choice because what we found in our text was that it's almost by accident. Not any mention, really in any of the texts that we looked at, about it being unusually insightful, which is a very strong claim that requires a lot of evidence. Moreover, we keep going, it says, because it has fundamentally changed the way lignin is understood. Again, this might seem to reference the one of the texts that talks about how basically discovering lignin is changing our view about the evolutionary timeline, or basically the evolution of lignin in plants. But unusually insightful and fundamentally changed are very, very strong words, very, very strong phrases, and they're going to require a lot of evidence if we choose them. And in the text that we looked at, we just don't have that. Moreover, it doesn't match the text that we chose, C, which seems to be the strongest text to answer our question. So for that reason, I don't think A is a really good answer choice. We should get rid of that. B says that it's somewhat questionable, which is sort of expressing skepticism about his research interests, which, again, none of the texts really characterize it like that. So on face value, I'm going to sort of be dismissive or more skeptical of this answer choice, but let's keep reading. It says, because Martone based his conclusions on an atypical sample. This would be if instead of looking at lignin production in general, sort of a random sample, he was looking at it in some specific zone or specific region where it might be an exception rather than the rule. That's not what we have. None of the texts, and especially the text that we have, none of them characterize his research as being questionable, so we get rid of B. Then we have C, which says that his research interests are properly cautious because Martone checked his findings about this algae multiple times. So it probably is true that he checked it multiple times. Maybe he's just doing his due diligence. But there's nothing in the text or in the passage that says that he was being overly cautious or even properly cautious about it and that he was just checking it multiple times. It might be true, but we don't really have any evidence for that. So for that reason, I would get rid of C. And that's going to leave us with D, which says that his research interests were initially secondary because it was undertaken to support particular questions about this algae here. So initially secondary basically means that the first thing he was trying to do was not to find lignin in the algae, which is exactly what these lines say. He didn't set out to locate lignin in algae. Instead, he wanted to support particular questions about this, which is basically he wanted to look at the toughness of this algae. So answer choice D definitely works here. It also, I'll just point out, has that nice quality, that nice SAT correct answer choice quality of being a little bit vague, a little bit general, and almost abstracting out what's actually happened into more general abstract language. So it is a really good answer choice. We're going to choose answer choice D for 45 and answer choice C for question 46.